welcome Dr. Lefebvre, who was my advisor, and not in 2007 actually. The first time I graduated was just even longer, but super, that's great. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to the opportunity to speak with you, and I hope the conversation, it should be more of a conversation, so ask questions as they come up, don't wait. And also, because I come from mostly practice, that this won't be a very theoretical conversation either. What I have found is that there's a lot of awesome stuff you can get from theories, and then as you go into industry, you kind of have to mix them all up, and the waters get quite muddy, and it's not nearly as concrete as we might like or have learned about. So the reason why I called my talk The Human Factor of UX is, one, because I'm very clever, and two is because I feel like there's a lot of amazing work that can be done if you take all of the, the best practices of user experience and all the design principles and all of the rigor of user research, and you can apply them to product design, and ultimately the thing that is the most challenging are the people who are involved. And so the intention was to talk about how to take all of the great things that you know, but then how does the maturity of the enterprise and the other people that you're working with, how does that impact and affect how we design products? So that was the intention there. So before we get started, I just want to you can get to know me, and then I get to know you. So we'll have a little quiz. So this is multiple choice. And yeah. Who wants to take a stab at the multiple choice quiz? Don't be shy. Yes.
Were you offensive?
You know what? Of everything up here, that is one of the only things that I was not. That is it's the false answer. But good guess. And so now you know that, I used to be, well, actually, no, he was also not an MMA fighter, clearly. But I was an Irish dancer for a really, really long time. Any other guesses for the other two?
Michael Phelps.
Also, I have met Alicia Keys and Meister Freshfest, but not Michael Phelps. Not Michael Phelps. Anyone else?
TV show.
No, I used to do all of those things. Okay, so now I'll ask for volunteers. You can I'll take 3 volunteers to give answers for you used to be a something, a famous person you met, or a job you used to have. Volunteer. Tamara.
What am I volunteering for?
What's a job you used to have way back? High school?
I'm getting 3 options or just one?
No, just one. What's an interesting job you used to have? You used to work at a dry cleaners?
Yes.
There you go. Anyone else? Something that most people don't know about you. You used to do one of these things, or you in passing met someone, or... Yes, go.
I met Chloe Kardashian.
Did you? I feel like there's a story there.
No.
Not really. Okay. Thank you for bravery. Anyone else? Yes.
Adam McGoyan.
Did you really? Oh, that's interesting. Where was that?
In Toronto. He has a sister that plays the piano, and I went to see her, and he was there.
Oh, and he was there. Oh, that's funny. That's cool. So I'll tell you a little bit. Thank you guys for sharing little bits, and then if one pops into your head later, you feel you really need to share, please feel free. So I want to tell you a little bit about my background and where I came from, because in general, everyone has a story about where they came from, and knowing sort of the path that I took to get here kind of gives you a little bit more information and gives an understanding about me. So this is my origin story, permit me. So my origin story about how I ended up in user experience is when I was I think I was about 13 or 14. My dad was working for a long time. He worked at Corel, and he did Corel Draw. And after Corel Draw, he did Corel Video, which was a really early webcam conferencing, web video kind of thing, right? So you can talk to each other over like early Skype, but very primitive. And so he invited me into his den one night, and it was like, oh, Meaghan, it's so cool. You have to try this out. And so he started a call with one of his developers in the lab back at work. And it was a big CRT monitor, and it had like this sort of roundish webcam, if you can think back to like a really old Logitech cam. So it was a round little orbit, and it sat on the top of the CRT monitor. So when I was doing the call, I had to look up like this if I wanted to look into the camera, but I'm looking at the guy's face, so I'm looking like this. The thing is, he is doing the same thing on the other side. So when I see him looking at me, he's looking down like this, right? And it was really neat, and all they were doing was just trying to get the video started, and the fact that we had audio and video working was really cool. And we had, I don't know, like 2 minutes of a conversation, and we hung up the phone. And I was young, and I felt kind of embarrassed to say, but I just felt like I couldn't not say. And I said, Dad, this is so neat. I do have to tell you that having the conversation with him, his eye level was here, and I felt like he was talking to my chest the whole time, and it made me feel uncomfortable. And he said, oh my God, we only have men developing this. We wouldn't even have cared, because all we care about is the fact that the video is working and the audio is working and we have the technology. And so what they ended up doing was they prototyped a cam that kind of hooked down over the front of the CRT and dropped a bit. So instead of talking to my chest, he was kind of talking to the bottom of my chin. And all of a sudden, I was so much more comfortable having that conversation. And then I was like, that was actually really fun. And I got over my embarrassment, and I was glad to have, that was my origin story of how I ended up in user experience. So I started here, like Dr. Ramirez said, I started in the HotLab. Mastery was a user experience consultancy, came out of Design Interpretive. And so after being in academia for a long time, I went to Mastery. And they were a small group of consultants, just user experience. And Macadamian, which is the M in the blue over there, very early on was just a custom software engineering shop, and they bought Mastery in order to help improve the design. And then, and it sort of parallels the user UX maturity, is that a very low maturity in terms of design and user experience, that company bought Mastery, and then we tried to figure out how to work together. And that was a really interesting experience. Both of those shops were consultancies. So I spent almost 10 years at Macadamian and was able to work with, I don't even know, hundreds and hundreds of different companies. It was a fantastic experience. And as a consultant, you get to sort of do a little bit of work for somebody, move on, do another one, move on, do another one. It's just it's really, really fun. And then after being at Macadamian for almost 10 years, I moved to Click. And Click is a BI company. We make data visualization and dashboarding tools. And so for a couple years there, I did a stint on a product company. Also, fantastic opportunity to learn a ton of stuff. They do really interesting work, and they continue to do really interesting work. And there was really nothing that pushed me out the door at Click other than the opportunity at PwC to grow a line of business and to grow the digital services. So now I'm back as a consultant working for PwC. And it is user experience still, but it has more to do with business strategy, change management, digital transformation, and then the user experience as well, as I bring those best practices to that type of work. So that's a little bit about me. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is this is a topic that is kind of it was topical at the time that Tamara asked me for my abstract, and I was working with a company, and we had sort of underestimated how mature they would be in terms of integrating design into the development process. And so it was sort of top of mind, but then as I got into it, I realized that there's a lot of depth there and a lot of stuff that we can talk about. So I want to talk to you today about user experience maturity. And well, first of all, we're not really talking about immature people or very wise and superstar type of people who come in with a lot of mature ways of looking. We're really not talking about that kind of maturity. We're really talking about the ability for an enterprise, a product design company, to integrate design and design practices into the development of the product. So we're not really talking about, even the word maturity already has the connotation of immature and very mature, as almost has the positive and negative aspect to it. And I feel like it's really less about the positive and negative aspects of being immature versus mature. It's just that, you guys are all going to be UX practitioners soon. So it's already in the water that you want to be able to work with a company who integrates user experience in a mature way. That to say there are not that many of them, so this is sort of helpful in terms of some practical advice from somebody who's done it for a while about how to work with an immature company in terms of design and how to help to integrate those practices better. Right? The other thing that I should mention is that you'll find my quotes different, is because I thought, well, like anybody can Google UX quotes. So instead, I went to my network in Ottawa and the people that I know and said, tell me your quotes on user experience. So these are real people talking about their experience and just their reflections on UX. So this is from my good friend Scott, who's the VP at Macadamian and who knows a ton about UX maturity and has written a couple papers on it as well. I'm sure it's not a very big community, so I'm sure you've run into Macadamian before, and their UX maturity white papers are great. Does anybody have any questions on what I mean about UX maturity so far? I know I only just started, but so far. Is it a foreign topic? Have you heard about this topic before? No one? So I'm assuming it's all pretty new? Yeah?
Okay, vaguely, years ago, from a colleague of mine, she was
Yeah.
my mentor in my presentation.
Okay.
And she was interested in working with this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like we were talking about it randomly, and now when I read your title, I remembered, talk about that. Thanks.
Okay, perfect, yeah. And I think it's something that sort of came about organically, the different types of company. Being a consultant, you work with so many different types of companies at almost a spectrum of maturity in terms of UX. And ultimately, like, why do we care about a company that has a higher degree of UX maturity? But really, the reason why we care is that we are doing this a lot, and in a place that has a better integration of a better understanding of user experience design and an integration. And as soon as the user-centered design becomes part of the water, the language, and the DNA of the company, you're doing much less of this. That reference is okay? So yes, some shaking heads, a bit, okay. So the other thing that I found when I was doing the preparation for the talk is that there are a ton of maturity models. I found one presentation that had over 30 different types of user experience maturity models. And quite frankly, there can't possibly be 30 different actual theories that really work into real life. And I think the reason why there are so many different theories and models available is because it isn't very black and white. It's not very clean. It is more of a spectrum. You can have a company who in some ways is somewhere down here at around a level 2, in some ways has a foot over here in level 5, and nothing is all that cut and dried. So I think that's why you see so many theories available and they don't all fit very neatly or cleanly. And so that's sort of a bit of a caveat, is when I talk about the different phases, they're not really that mutually exclusive. And even if they are, you're certainly not going to find a company who fits neatly and squarely into one phase or another. Okay? There are good and bad for working for all of them. And if you slide into a company who's somewhere up around 5 or 6 in a very high maturity, maybe there's just not a lot of opportunity and challenge. It's also a very comfortable place, it's a very nice place, and you can have a lot of great opportunity to do interesting things and interesting work, but it doesn't challenge the change management aspect of UX. So there's good and bad at working with both. So what I did is in all of those 30 plus models, I distilled everything that I could. I took an average number of phases based on the different types of theories, and I also took a lot of labels and words out of the different theories, and I kind of just tried to give you an aggregate view of what sort of a translation could be. It's certainly not a model that I'm proposing per se, also because I don't think they fit into those numbers. I think it's just a very loose spectrum of stuff. So you can see that, especially early on in phases 1 and 2, some of the language that you find in the industry does have the negative connotations, like hostility. Like that sounds like a super bad thing. And just because a company is design immature doesn't mean they are a hostile company, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're dumb people. It just means that they have developed their practices without really considering design, and for whatever reason they're selling a lot of stuff and they're doing great work. That's fine. And they might be hostile towards UX, but they might not be a hostile company writ large, right? So let's sort of take that into account as we're going through, and also consider that some of the different authors have different views of like us versus them, and you'll find that, you know, reaching enlightenment at the end also suggests that, you know, people have self-actualized and that they are, you know, all-seeing, all-knowing. Not necessarily, just they're better at integrating user experience and UX design. So I feel like there are somewhere around 6 different phases along this continuum of maturity. And we'll go through, and I can talk a little bit about some of my experiences with companies at different levels. And also the part that I find interesting is what happens in between. What are some things, and this is where, as UX practitioners, you have the opportunity, those are the areas where you can help to push and help to move, help to evangelize, help to bring those product design teams along the maturity level, because ultimately that makes your job easier, and ultimately you're making better design products with considering the user. So I think that there's some interesting stuff that we can talk about. Also, as you go through, you'll find that any maturity model might have 7 different types of characteristics, or 3, or whatever. In general, I feel like you can fit most things into these 4 categories, where you're talking about the types of people or resources that you have available in the UX team, the types of practices, methodologies, the things that you do and the stuff, who owns the UX practice, who drives it, who runs it, who ultimately is accountable for it, and what are the things that you're measuring. And for the most part, most of the theories take these things into account at different levels. So they mostly fit cleanly into 4 buckets, and we'll try to talk about stuff as we go. Okay? Okay. So if we consider a company that is reasonably immature about user experience, typically they don't have a lot of UX resources available. Design is not really considered, sometimes it's actually considered to slow them down. So a lot of times I've run across architects and software engineers that are like, yeah, listen, that's cool, you have wireframes, but like I've already built it. So, you know, maybe next time. Because design is, you know, particularly at a low maturity level, you know, conversely, if you empower your designers with carte blanche to do whatever you want, and you force the architects to wait, then, you know, design is allowed to do that, and we're slowing down the architects. Sure, that's how they might feel, but if you give your architects carte blanche to do whatever they like, then they're not interested in waiting for the designers to think through the concept design, or to host a workshop, to involve users, to come and do participatory design, all of those things. They're like, I just want to build it. I know how to do it, I've already done it, it's working. So it is the developers who are making the design choices. And ultimately, what are they measuring? Well, of course, they're not really measuring design because they don't consider design. But if they had to, it might be the number of UI elements that they have on the screen, right? That's how, I guess, if you had to pick a measurement, that might be one. So an example of a company that I was working with was a networking company in Canada on March Road. And I was with Macadamian at the time, and they said, oh, well, this is our design team. And he's like, oh, you might know one of our designers. They work at Macadamian now. And so he gave me the name, and I said, oh, well, at Macadamian, he's a software architect. And he said, yeah, well, here we call them designers. Oh, okay, that's neat. And who designs the screens? Like, who decides what happens? Because ultimately you have a screen, right? And stuff happens on the screen. Who puts that there? And he said, oh, well, the designers, who are the software architects, they put tags into their code, and when it compiles, it just looks for the visual tags and puts that on the screen, and that's what the screen looks like. Okay, that's cool. That's really cool. And they said, you know, we're being killed. Our competitors are being called really easy to use, and you know, we think we need a UX manager. And I thought, you want to hire a UX manager for a design team that's made of software architects? Does not seem like a recipe for success. Kind of thinking that they're going to jump over to stage 4 by hiring a UX manager, and then all of a sudden, like, magic's just going to happen. Very difficult. So that's some of the conflicts that come out of working with a company at low maturity, is that sort of disconnect of expectations. I feel most of the reasons why that happens is because if any user, you can see something on the screen, you see what is simple and easy to use, you see that it's clean, and you think, oh, I could do that. That seems pretty cool. And it's something that my kids suffer from is when they watch these videos on YouTube. Has anyone seen Dude Perfect videos? Anyways, 4 or 5 guys, they do these amazing trick shots, right? So they can throw a basketball from the roof of a warehouse, and it, you know, goes into the basket, which is like 7 football fields away. This is just crazy. And it looks really easy, and so they think, oh yeah, that's cool. I'd probably do that. And they're not very good. But in that same way, as I see it, it looks really easy. I should be able to do it. Whereas code, nobody sees code. Even if you see it, you can't read it unless you wrote it or unless you actually speak that language. And so design, especially at a low maturity company, if I can see good design, then it can't be that hard, right? Just some boxes, and then you put some words on there, and, like, you know, just pick some nice colors, and it can't be that hard. But that's, of course, the fallacy of doing something really well. It makes it look really simple, and they don't really understand all of the work that's gone into the design, and that is one of the reasons, I think, where the conflict comes in at the low maturity scale, is just don't know what they don't know, and they assume you can just put some nice colors on it and it'll be well designed. So what can you do? If you end up working for a team that you sort of recognize has a low maturity level, what are some of the things that you can do as a practitioner to try to encourage design thinking, design practices, and just better integration of user experience? Well, at this point, I think that the best strategy is just awareness, just low-level awareness of what's going on. You're certainly not going to be able to boil the ocean. You need a crazy big kettle to boil the ocean. And mostly you're probably just working at a component level, maybe at not even a pattern library, but like component patterns, or maybe icon library, style guide, that kind of thing. And so things like lunch and learns, those are really helpful. Obviously your UI elements are going to be your library, but really speaking the language of the developers who've never worked with designers, then you can start to build bridges. Because ultimately, once developers have worked well with designers, it goes faster. It makes their job easier. They don't have to make those decisions that they used to anymore because, oh, they have a professional who understands how to make those decisions, and it does end up going faster. Everybody is happier if they both understand what they're bringing to the table. So the more you can listen to their problems and speak their language, then it doesn't feel like we're slowing you down. Maybe you can actually benefit a little bit. Telling meaningful stories, listening. One of the lunch and learns, it's a really old video, but it's honestly really great, was the case study of the IDEO shopping cart. It's like really old, yeah, maybe. Anyway, IDEO, one of their original case studies was how to redesign the shopping cart, and they did a design sprint on how and they prototyped a physical new shopping cart, and there's a 20-minute video, and it's a great lunch and learn. You can just play it, and then everybody sits around and talks about, well, what did that look like when everybody was involved in the process and everybody had a say, and what happened when we went to the grocery store and we prototyped and we let other people talk, like use our physical prototypes. How did that change the design? And those kinds of things are really, really impactful. So let's say you've been, the awareness level is growing, and there's some, you're starting to see some hope, some glimmers here. So maybe the resource team looks more like UI developers and front-end developers. Well, that's a start, because at least now that there's some consideration that there's effort involved in making the front end, and it's not just about painting pictures. On the side of the processes, all of the things that users see get touched by the front-end developers. Again, it's starting to be helpful. It's starting to be a little bit more mature about how to integrate design into development. Of course, we're still really just talking about icons, controls, components, maybe an overall screen, but not necessarily the information design, more just about a general sort of the lipstick part, right? So down in the ownership part, I was saying, like, the developers, they quote unquote, the front end developers, they will own the design, but the thing is, because they don't really have a say in the information design and the workflow design, they own the stuff that you see at the top level, but they can't possibly own the entire experience because that was already written by the software architects or the product owners, the product managers, whoever else, and it wasn't really considered. So they might own what you see, but they can't possibly own the whole workflow. And that is a really frustrating. It's almost like it's easier at stage 1 versus stage 2 and 3 even, because if you are held responsible for something that you really didn't have any accountability for, any impact on or control over, then that's a really frustrating spot to be. And all of your visual design elements might have been touched by the front-end developers, but not necessarily really worked. Skunkworks, is anyone familiar with what that word means? Skunkworks. So a little bit of my story there, and how we'll get into the next one is this low-hanging fruit. Skunkworks is like, you just get a small SWAT team and you kind of do it under the covers, and then you go, oh, see all this awesome stuff that we did, and then you just do a big reveal. Our other software teams do it, might as well do it for the design team. In fact, there are a lot of mature practices that Click had, but one of the things that Click had that was not very mature, but honestly was still a great opportunity, was the CTO. He said, okay, we have this cloud product. We know there's a lot of stuff wrong with it. We know it's not targeting the right demographic, the right use, the workflow is different, it's being hampered by a lot of things, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could get, and we just don't have enough resources. And so he said to me, in one milestone, if a milestone is 5 beats and each beat is 2 weeks, so you have 10 weeks, you are allowed to fix anything you want as long as you can do it in one milestone. Go. It was awesome. Gave me a couple of front-end developers. I took one of my designers. We whiteboarded the heck out of it. And we knew we couldn't change major conceptual pieces of it, but we changed a whole bunch of stuff, and we went more than shallow. We went sort of like mid-level because we had 10 weeks to do it. And they just said, fix everything you have in one milestone. At the end of the milestone, we're not touching the user experience anymore. We're going on to something else. And so it was a bit of a Skunkworks exercise. But honestly, it was great. It was a great opportunity. It was great to sort of galvanize people, take them off their regular stuff, give them that very focused thing. And yeah, and they changed a lot of stuff. It was really great. What else might move you along from stage 2 into stage 3, or sort of along the spectrum of maturity with design, is you might try research. It's like my best friend in terms of being able to show the power of good user experience, and the power of design is showing how real people are failing at the things that you thought your software was able to do. It's just such a great advocate. The more you can have quotes and video clips of real people who are doing, struggling, or show the workarounds that people have developed. My favorite workarounds are still monitor stickies. If you go to a work environment and you're watching people work, you know, there's that thing that you need to remember, and you can never remember how to do it on that stupid program, so you write it on a sticky and you stick it on your monitor. Monitor stickies are my favorite indicators of the workarounds that people need to do, and they can just never remember how to do it. So things like that, pictures of real people using your stuff is the most powerful thing that you can have. Sometimes it's greeted with hostility, but for the most part, it's embraced as, oh, thanks, we didn't know. We didn't know. Working it, especially in a product team, unfortunately, there are so many levels between you and the actual user that you just kind of either have to take guerrilla tactics, or be patient, or orchestrate some kind of way to talk to real users. Does anyone have any questions so far? Anything that sort of triggered something? You guys said you're having like the post-lunch. I'm cheating because I'm on my feet. You guys don't have that. Sorry. So stage 3, as you're moving farther along the spectrum, I say that it's the most crowded because there are a lot of companies that can generally get around here, and there are a lot of companies who sort of end up sticking around here because they've done some of the things right. So they've got a team. Maybe there's one person who's a super generalist, or maybe there's a small team of user experience professionals who know how to do a lot of stuff. So that means that, you know, they're trained in design, but they're moonlighting as a researcher, or they're a researcher and they're trying to do some strategy and like maybe some wireframes, and there's a visual designer who can do concepts but also can write the code to make the concepts come to life, like somebody who can really stretch. And a small team of doing that. And usually what happens is that there's that small team, and that small team gets shared to multiple product lines, right? So you can be, you know, UX for 3 or 4 different products and have to share and straddle your time between multiple product lines. And it's tight, and there are different sort of strategies of how to manage that, but a lot of companies will adopt that model, and that's kind of good enough for how far they're going to get. So in this kind of environment, you're seeing things like wireframes. There is interaction design. Typically, it's at the screen level or from one screen to the next screen. It's great for the nugget that is the user story. As a user, I need to do this so I can complete this, or I need to complete this so that I can, right? Those one sentence things, which are typically talking about functionality as opposed to the entire usage scenario or even the bigger context. But if you can get a workflow that meets that particular user story and it's well designed, then, you know, you're starting to have some wins. The design Team, again, you have a team who owns the user experience, but they haven't always been able to influence the entire workflow, so they really can only own the visual elements. Now, of course, they have a broader breadth, so maybe there is a style guide and maybe there are design patterns that can be used and reused, but they haven't been able to design from scratch the entire system, of course. Now we're starting to see real measurements too. If you've been able to get here, typically you're doing some type of user testing or usability research. And so, and a lot of times it's ad hoc. It's like whenever you think about it, or maybe you have a new feature coming out, so you do some usability testing. It's not necessarily rigorous, but it's at least it's there. And usability testing, of course, is great at doing pass-fail. Of course, you can use a SUS. Depends on how mature the feature is, you know, that whether if it's just a prototype and it's not really taking in information, if it's just a concept walkthrough, a SUS isn't really all that useful for being able to generalize across the rest of the things, but at least you're getting something. And it's great for pass-fail. And timing, again, whether you need to do task timing really depends on the context of the issue. Some contexts it's really critical, other times it's just confusing. So how would you go from 3, keeping going? Well, now you're going to have to start really getting into it. And it's actually some of the things that are really fun. But you, at this point now, you know, there's been some type of progress in terms of maturity. You might have a team, and you're certainly have seen an improvement in the relationship of the design development relationship and the integration of user experience practices. And so if you have some of that trust, then you can start to do really interesting things like a design sprint. And that's really fun. It's great to have a well-scoped problem statement and then each 5 days dedicate to that particular part of the design sprint. And by the end, everyone is just amazed at the ability and what their ability to work through it, but also the product that they get afterwards and the way that the users react to it and how they can continue to iterate it. It's a fantastic exercise. It does take time, but I've never heard anybody get through a design sprint and go like, oh, that was a waste. It's always really, really good. Or hackathons, they're also intense, they're shorter. Most hackathons are usually like that 24-hour business or the whole weekend or something like that. And those are also really fun, and they're a great microcosm of a good integrated relationship. Even if that's not how you work every day, at least you're doing it for those 5 days or that weekend, and then you think, gosh, that was fun. I'd like to be able to do that again in real life. What can we take out of that? Prototyping, then that starts to become a fantastic friend about showing the art of the possible. Even if front-end development is working well with you, then prototyping can be really fun. But the other part of moving the maturity along is measuring. So I call them monopoly money metrics because, you know, at this point, no executive is interested in putting dollars on the table for usability metrics. But if you said, well, what if? What if it cost you this much for this many failures or this much abandonment or whatever? And you can start to have those what if conversations, then that starts to sound more like business strategy to the executives, and it also sounds more like, oh, that might influence the way that we design the product. Tell me more. So those kinds of exercises and those kinds of conversations will help to move along the maturity scale. So as we're getting closer to the end of the scale, we're sort of past the halfway point. This was a quote from a good friend, Francis. He works now for Varian Medical, and he and I worked together for a long time. And one of the things that he pointed out that I thought was really interesting is it isn't so much about a magic wand. You can't force it, and it's not really about, like, yes, design sprints are very helpful, and they can certainly help you to have conversations that you wouldn't have had otherwise. But until everyone on the team really understands what user experience brings to the table and how they can better work together, and here he's really talking about, he calls it design literacy, which is another great way of talking about UX maturity, is to now you know enough to know what you don't know. Sorry about that. If you can see what the effect is of a bad design, then you're starting to see, well, what can I win from doing design better? And if they can acknowledge that, there's this professional or a team of professionals who can bring good design choices to the table, then everybody wins. And that takes a long time. So here, as you're getting closer up, so stage 4, this is somewhere around stage 4 is honestly where I would have put my experience working with Click. And I use Click as my main product design example because I spent longer there than I did with any of the other product companies as a consultant. As a consultant, you're there for, sometimes 4 days, sometimes 4 months, but certainly not much longer than that. So you're starting to see more about what you're familiar with, about what user experience practicing ought to look like. So maybe now you have a multidisciplinary UX team. Maybe you actually have researchers on staff and visual designers and front-end developers and interaction designers. Maybe you have an information architect. Maybe you've gone as far as, I worked with Pitney Bowes, the company who makes postage meters. It's very specific. But the little box that you stick an envelope in and a stamp comes down and that's your stamp and postage meter. They actually have an anthropologist on staff, full-time employed anthropology, working in product design. It was really cool. Anyway, so multidisciplinary UX team. That team, again, likely shared across multiple product lines. You're starting to be able to flex your muscles a bit more with workflow diagrams and wireframes. Maybe you've got personas that you use or other types of archetypes. And there is the opportunity to do real research. Design reviews are a really helpful tool if your UX team still can't hit every single product that you make. At least the products that don't have a UXer can be up for a design review where all the design team goes and sort of red lines everything. Oh, circle this, change this, whatever. Go back and make those changes. At least we've helped you somewhat. And that can be a really helpful tool. Typically you have a UX manager or director of UX at that point. So now you're starting to have the leadership. And that person, so in the transitioning phase that we talked about before, the monopoly money metrics, now that person actually has those metrics that they are responsible for. And you might see that you're doing more industry-specific, like usability ratings, user-specific ratings. Maybe you're looking at things like Gartner and Forrester and how you rank against other companies in terms of UX and user experience. Then you're starting to really measure how does your user experience and your customer experience impact the way that your product is being used and maybe how it is designed in the future. Yes?
And how is that manager being selected? Based on experience, based on what type of background?
That's a good question, and it's honest. In practice, I have found that the manager is hired like any other manager is somebody who was good at doing their job for a long time, and they got promoted. Now, sometimes that works out really well because they really understand the domain, but they can also lead people, and they understand the business, and that is a great fit. But like anything, not all people who get promoted are good at managing people. Now, UX in general tends to err better on the side of that because we already start from a user-centered design perspective. So that just ends up in our favor of being able to either recognize that we need somebody with management experience, or in just general being able to be promoted to understand how to better work with people. But it's just like, certainly at that level, somebody who's been doing it for more than 5 years and they're ready for promotion and they get promoted, like all of the other managers. I wouldn't see somebody at like the C level until we get farther down the maturity scale. So here I would say that it was very similar to what we had for Click. We would have, we had I think 20 different people on our UX team. We had user experience strategists, we had design researchers, we had usability testers dedicated just to testing. Then we had visual designers, visual coders, interaction designers, information architects. They would all sort of form these clusters who understood a particular domain, and they would work with multiple product lines in that cluster of stuff. They were still shared across different products, but in sort of one area or another that they had a better domain expertise in. And there was obviously executive leadership there. And some of the things that we started to look at and that helped us move from 4 and keep going a little bit is to look outside of Click, or to look outside of the product that you're working on. So here is some of the tools that have become really helpful is looking at indirect influences to usability metrics or UX metrics, or even external outside of the company. So what I'm talking about is some things that make things helpful is looking at all the support calls, looking at what the help desk deals with, and how does that impact the product design or the next feature. What about pre-sales? Why are they losing deals? Why did that person not sign? A loss review is also really helpful for understanding how should that feature be better designed. So you're not just doing R&D and user experience, you're starting to pull from other departments to help inform a more holistic product design. Maybe, again, because you're pulling those metrics, hopefully you're not just pulling the spreadsheet, but you're pulling the person as well. And inviting to a design review or inviting to that design sprint someone from docs, which is like your help and stuff like that, someone from support, someone from pre-sales. They've got their own view of their version of the customer's voice. And they're coming at it from different aspects. And they can be really helpful. And now you're starting to see not just about the stuff that I'm building today, but how my product is being used in the real world from a lot more different perspectives. And so going outside of that silo, I think, really starts to help build that picture, but also to build trust. So if we're talking about down here, competitive usability testing, that's not just can my users complete the task that I want them to do, but can they do it better than my competitors? Maybe instead of just testing my new feature, I test that similar feature across 3 different products. And who does it better? And what can we learn? Or how can we differentiate ourselves? How can we bring our value through what we're designing so that the customers can genuinely see what is the value that my product is bringing to the table? That requires more trust. So that's why you can't do if you did competitive usability testing down at stage 1 or 2, people will be like, what? You can't do that. There's no trust. And there's no understanding of what it takes to really design a product well. And so you can't jump those things. You need the people to trust you need the relationships, and you need that understanding of what UX brings before you can really do that at the right level. So maybe now you've developed a small army. Now you're starting to have real ownership and influence on the design. So maybe you have not just one usability team that's spread across, maybe you have 2 or 3 actual UX teams. And they have a manager, and that person is the director. It's not just about the hierarchy, but it's about the amount of influence that you can have. And then you're starting to look at things like, Now we're doing paper prototyping. Now it's not just that we're doing usability testing, we have a new feature. It's that the third Friday of every month we have 10 users coming in. What are they doing today? What are they doing next month? What are we doing with those metrics? You just always lather, rinse, repeat of that testing and that rigor. And no matter where you are, you stop and test. Design reviews, like I was saying before, non-UX projects. So you're trying to increase the reach of the UX team. Maybe have a secondment where a UXer goes to, a team that doesn't have any UX, and then they come back for a while. So go from immature back to mature. That can also be really helpful. And the people who own the UX are now the product owners. So you're starting to see a diffuse ownership of the user experience. User experience does not live just with the UX team, but everybody cares about it. And the person who owns that product, who's ultimately the product owner, when you say, what wakes you up in the middle of the night, it is that product. That's their baby, and they own everything about it. And even though they don't create the user experience, they own the user experience, and so they have a vested interest in ensuring that everybody is actually working towards a better designed product. When you can tie usability performance into your user experience strategy, then you're starting to be able to measure user experience at that design level. And when you say, for example, if we're starting to talk about UX strategy, how do customers and how do users experience the value that your product brings? If you have value, if your product does something really cool, but it's hidden underneath such a clunky interface, then your users will never actually know what cool value you've brought. And so if you can tie, people can do that thing that we said that they could do, and they can do it faster or better, or there's a more interesting differentiator about what they can do with our product, then we're starting to tie the performance of how well they did on the task into the strategy of the design of the product. And that maybe that starts to live at a user experience strategy level. So it's a lot more integrated. It is an engaged kind of company. It's a bit more systemic across the different groups. So one example of a company that I saw was sort of starting to get into this level was, again, this gentleman had a multidisciplinary team, a large team. He was the director of UX, but it still wasn't large enough to hit every single product. And so what he asked his product owners to do was betting. And so they were given like coins, which aren't actual coins. The coins would represent the budget that they had. And they said, we have this many coins to spend on UX in this sprint, milestone, year, quarter, whatever. And that's how many resources they could get. And then they were ranked according to priority. And so the gold projects would represent the gold, the ones with the most coins. They were the ones that had the biggest bang for your buck. Maybe they were the flagship product. Maybe they had the most direct impact to the bottom line. Maybe it was new. There was a lot of investment in it. And then the sort of the tier 3, the bronze, didn't have so much coins. Maybe it was something that it was a product, it was available, but they were not actively investing in it. Maybe it was the end of life, maybe it was version 27, and it was there and it was running and it didn't need to have a lot of extra stuff in it. So you still have to do some betting, but there you're talking about real dollars and mapping it to real effort and real people, and that's starting to have an impact in product design. So if you can start to talk about user experience in the boardroom, and here we're talking about the C-level, the CEO, the CTO. If you're lucky at this point, now you're starting to talk about the role of the CXO. Then that's starting to have the most impact in what is the product that we're building, how customer and user-centric is it. So we're linking usability, performance, and UX metrics, qualitative feedback and calls into business metrics. How many new people have bought our stuff? What's our adoption like? What's our upgrade path like? What's our renewals? Whatever business metrics that you have that represent the growth of your company if they are directly tied to how a user can use it, now the user experience of that becomes business critical. And it's at the very, very top. And if you're competing on how well you're doing in your user experience, now it's really starting to be it's kind of like in the DNA. And so some of you might have even taken a class with Dom. He used to teach product design here. And he's now the director of UX at UITV, which is really cool. And KPIs is key performance indicators. If you don't have a key performance indicator that doesn't reflect your user experience, you don't have any accountability of your user experience. Like, you might think user experience is nice and design is good and it's nice to have pretty things, but if it's not tied to a KPI, then it's nice, but I don't care about it. It doesn't wake me up at night. But if I am accountable for it, sorry, that's my microphone. If I'm accountable for it, then it does wake me up at night, and then you're starting to see that real integration. Then it becomes it's in the water. It's no longer just the realm of the UX team to care about the user experience. The executives, the directors, everyone cares that the product is well designed, that people can actually use it. Everyone cares.
So we get to the bottom line, return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that sort of diffuse ownership, so it's hard, like, it's almost easier at that point than for everyone to care about good design, because, I mean, we can care about a thorough and well-designed software architecture. Of course we can care, but we can't appreciate it at the same level of design. And this is actually where we can take what used to hinder us, who I talked about at the beginning. Now we can use that to our advantage, and everyone can care about an exceptionally well-designed product. UX becomes embedded in the product team. Sometimes you don't even have a department of UX anymore. It's just part of the water. You just have product teams, and the product team has the UX and the architecture and the QA, and everybody is there all the time. And so it's important, of course, for you to speak with other people who do UX in the company, but you might not have a UX team. You're just in it like everyone else. And the design practices are as embedded in the team as code reviews and as other types of more traditional product development. Your UX metrics are not just tied to your UX strategy, but tied to your business strategy. And it's just part of the water. Yeah?
In your experience, have you worked with like any or many companies that you would say are at a level 6?
No. No, I mean, I have done like small bits of consulting with them. So I did work with Evernote. That seems like a pretty cool company. There was a small company called Path. It was a social media tracking, imagine Strava, but for social.
Okay.
Yeah, small startup in San Francisco. And some of the startups have been really interesting. They just didn't keep going for whatever reason. I haven't actually worked directly with Shopify, but from what I understand, it's probably encroaching on this level. Even as it scales more, maybe it's sliding back a little bit because you start to revert a little bit. Hard to say because I haven't actually worked there directly, but I feel like my colleagues who work there might say that.
Okay.
Yeah, but not a lot of companies live up there too, right? That's just not where they are. So is it enough? Is it enough to just have sticky notes on the wall or concept designs? Maybe you've hired a UX unicorn who can do everything. Maybe your designers have awesome beards and they look like super cool hipsters. Is it really enough to just put all of those things there and so that they just show up? It's not really enough because ultimately the humans are responsible for making the product decision, the design decisions. And so it's the people, the humans involved in product design that ultimately make the best products. So if you just throw in a cool hipster designer and some sticky notes and a unicorn, unless you have the relationships and unless you understand how to integrate them at a human level, it's still just, it's just not well designed for success. So if you've ever used an enterprise product that you feel like you're doing something over here, and then your workflow takes you here, and your workflow takes you here, and you feel like you've come through 3 different spaces, is probably because 3 different departments made those features and they didn't speak well to each other, and so they ended up with a product that feels like it came from 3 different companies, because it kind of did. Because the human element of the product design wasn't really well embedded. And this is my only quote from not one of my friends, as Nielsen, is you really can't, like I said before, I gave you that analogy, you can't do something in stage 4 and take that and put it into stage 2 and hope it works. You can't really jump, you slowly go along the spectrum of maturity, otherwise it just kind of breaks. And if honestly this was too much after lunch, just write me. I'm happy to answer any questions, have a chat, whatever. I love this stuff, so. And I see that I'm quite on the nose of my time. Thanks, guys.